They say rock bottom has a smell. A cold, metallic mix of damp concrete, old rain, and human regret. And on the night 19-year-old Evan Cole curled beneath the rusted highway bridge, he learned exactly what that smell was. It wasn't just the stench of the city. It was the stench of being forgotten. Cars roared overhead like thunder, but none of them knew the boy freezing under the bridge existed. If you had seen him that night, you would have thought he was just another shadow. But Evan wasn't a shadow. He was a boy whose mother had vanished when he was 12, whose father had drowned himself in alcohol until the world swallowed him whole, and whose last remaining family, an aunt, kicked him out the moment the bills got too high. On that night, Evan pressed his cheek against the cold cement and whispered, "Maybe this is the end." He didn't mean to die. He just didn't know how to keep living. And the city didn't care. Not then. Not yet. But if only those drivers had known who that boy would become. If only they knew that the same kid shivering under a bridge would someday return to this exact spot, not to sleep, but to build an empire. They would have stopped. They would have stared. They would have sworn they were witnessing a miracle in progress. But miracles don't introduce themselves. They grow in silence, buried in pain. And on that night, Evan Cole's miracle began. Morning didn't feel like morning. It felt like punishment. The sun crept between the cracks of the bridge, lighting up the stains on Evan's clothes and the bruises beneath his eyes. He sat up slowly, fighting the dizziness, the hunger, the memories he didn't want to remember. He had been homeless for 6 days. 6 days since his aunt slammed the door in his face and told him he needed to figure life out like everyone else. The problem was, everyone else had someone. Evan had no one. He didn't even have enough money for a sandwich. All he had was a torn backpack, a dead phone, and a pair of shoes so worn out they looked like they were begging him to give up walking. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold, it was the silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if the world would care if you disappeared. He walked to a nearby gas station restroom, splashed water on his face, and stared at the boy in the mirror. "Who are you?" The boy didn't respond. He looked like someone life had chewed up and spit out. Still, there was a flicker. A tiny fire in his eyes. A stubbornness he didn't ask for. He wiped his face, took a deep breath, and walked out. He had no plan. But he had one sentence echoing in his mind: "Do not die like this." And that sentence, that stubborn spark, is what kept his feet moving. Evan walked for hours, searching for anything. A job, a shelter, a sign, a reason not to collapse. By noon, the heat rose, baking the pavement until it felt like the world was daring him to quit. He stopped at every store with a help wanted sign, but the responses were all the same: "Do you have an ID? Do you have an address? You need clean clothes. You need experience." Life required everything Evan didn't have. He dragged himself into a small diner, the kind with flickering neon lights and cracked booths. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Blake, didn't even let Evan finish his sentence. "Son, I don't hire people who look like trouble." Evan didn't argue. He just nodded and stepped out, swallowing the humiliation. He walked behind the diner toward the dumpster, hoping he'd find something to eat. Not food, he wasn't that desperate yet, but maybe a thrown-away drink cup with leftover soda. Instead, he found something else: a wallet. A brown leather wallet lying beside the dumpster. Evan picked it up slowly, heart pounding. Inside was a driver's license, a membership card, and 8 crisp $20 bills. For a moment, the world froze. This was food. This was clothes. This was hope. But it wasn't his. He sat on the curb, staring at the money, every voice inside him screaming a different thing. The hunger said, "Take it." His pride said, "Don't you dare." His fear asked, "What if this is your only chance?" Evan didn't know it yet. But this moment would define who he became. He sat there for 10 full minutes, gripping the wallet so tightly that his hands shook. His mind raced through every possibility. If he kept it, he could disappear for a few days, sleep in a cheap motel, fill his stomach, buy a clean shirt, maybe even print a resume at the library. But if he returned it, what then? He wouldn't gain anything. He wouldn't even get a thank you. People didn't thank boys sleeping under bridges. But something whispered inside him, not loud, just steady. Do what the man you want to become would do. Evan stood up, walked around the building, and entered the diner again. Sir. I found this outside. Is this yours? Mr. Blake's eyes widened. My God. Yes. I dropped it yesterday. He opened it, counted the money, and looked at Evan as though seeing him for the first time. Most people would have taken this. Evan shrugged. I'm not most people. And that sentence changed everything. Mr. Blake stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. Come back tomorrow at 6 a.m. I can't pay much. But I'll give you a chance. Wash dishes. Sweep floors. You show up, you keep the job. Evan nodded gratefully. But as he walked out of the diner, the truth hit him. He had a job. But he still had no food. No bed. No safety. He had to survive one more night. And that night would become the darkest night of his entire life. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a bruised purple. Evan headed back to the bridge, the only place he knew he wouldn't get kicked away from. But something felt off. As he approached the underpass, he heard voices, rough, angry voices. 3 older homeless men crowded around the spot Evan had been sleeping in. They didn't just look dangerous. They were dangerous. Everyone in the area knew them. Evan turned to walk away quietly, but one of them spotted him. Hey kid. Evan froze. This your spot? Evan swallowed. I don't want trouble. I'll go. But they stepped toward him anyway. You think you're better than us? The tallest one growled. Walking around like you ain't one of us. Evan raised his hands. Please. I'm just trying to. The man shoved him hard, knocking him to the ground. The others circled. Evan braced himself, but before the first punch landed, a voice boomed from behind them, back off. It was a police officer. The men scattered like rats. Evan, shaking and breathless, pushed himself up. The officer handed him a bottle of water. Kid, you can't sleep here. It's dangerous. Evan wiped his face. I don't have anywhere else. The officer paused, then pointed down the street. There's a church shelter 3 blocks away. Tell them Officer Ramirez sent you. And just like that, one stranger's kindness had saved him a second time in one day. The shelter wasn't much. But for Evan, it felt like heaven. A warm meal. A thin but clean blanket. A place where no one tried to hurt him. As he lay on the small cot, staring at the stained ceiling, something inside him softened. He wasn't safe. He wasn't stable. But he was alive. And he had a job waiting at sunrise. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope, not because he believed life was about to get better, but because he had survived long enough to see another morning. He whispered to himself, tomorrow. Just survive tomorrow. And that simple promise, whispered in a dark shelter bed, would become the seed of the empire he would one day build. An empire that didn't exist yet. An empire no one could imagine. Not even him. If you're still here listening to Evan's story, you already know this isn't just a story about poverty. This is a story about survival, the kind most people never talk about. The city was unforgiving, a labyrinth of neon lights and cold streets, where people walked fast and looked even faster, but never down. Evan wandered through it like a ghost, invisible to everyone except the rats and pigeons that shared his route. He slept in alleyways, avoided the police, and scavenged for food wherever he could find it, a dumpster behind a closed cafe, a half-eaten sandwich someone had thrown away, or the kindness of a stranger who didn't notice his hollow eyes. Every night was a gamble. Would he make it through without getting sick? Without getting robbed? Without getting swallowed by despair? And every morning, the sun brought no relief, Only another chance to realize he was still alone. Still penniless, still just another boy that the city had decided wasn't worth saving. Yet, inside him, that ember flickered, stubborn and small. It whispered, "You're not done yet." Evan remembered the library. He didn't remember the exact day he had stumbled upon it, only that it smelled of old paper and quiet hope. The librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a permanent frown, didn't ask questions. She let him sit in a corner and read, as long as he didn't make a sound. He devoured books on business, psychology, history, anything that told him how the world worked. He read about men and women who had started with nothing and somehow climbed out. Some had money, some had minds sharper than knives. Evan read, imagining that knowledge was a ladder and he was climbing it rung by rung, even if his hands were raw and bleeding from the streets. And for the first time in months, he felt something dangerous: hope. But hope doesn't pay the rent, or feed you, or keep the cold away. Evan learned that the hard way when he tried odd jobs. He painted fences, washed cars, delivered newspapers. Every penny he earned disappeared into cheap food or a bottle of water. One night, after a 12-hour shift delivering pizzas, he counted the crumpled bills in his pocket. $11.50. Enough for a slice of bread. Not enough for a bed. Not enough for dignity. Not enough for life. The streets seemed to mock him. And yet, as he lay under the bridge again, listening to the distant hum of the city that had ignored him for months, he whispered to himself, "This isn't forever." That whisper became a mantra. That mantra became a heartbeat. That heartbeat became a rhythm he could not ignore. Evan's turning point didn't arrive with a sudden lightning strike. It arrived quietly, painfully, in the form of a neighbor, a small cafe owner named Mr. Thompson, who noticed the boy crouched outside his store, shivering. He didn't offer charity. He offered work. Simple tasks at first: sweeping floors, washing dishes, taking out the trash. Evan accepted, trembling, because work, any work, felt like a foothold on a cliff face. The hours were long, the pay minimal, but every day he showed up. Every day he learned something new about responsibility, about respect, about the subtle ways the world expected him to fail, and how to refuse. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. Success never is. But Evan began to notice patterns, small openings in the chaos. He saved coins instead of spending them. He memorized customer names. He watched how Mr. Thompson negotiated with suppliers, how he built loyalty with regulars, how he treated mistakes as lessons rather than disasters. Evan absorbed it all, like a sponge starved for water. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the streets that had once been his enemy became his teacher. Every insult, every shove, every night spent shivering on concrete was transforming him. Not into someone invincible. Not into someone perfect. Into someone who would survive. Into someone who would rise, but the world is rarely patient with the desperate. One evening, Evan found his savings, the tiny stack of coins he had hoarded for weeks, gone. Stolen, along with the small sense of security it represented. The cold hit harder than ever. Rage surged, mingled with despair. He sat on the curb, fists digging into the cracked asphalt, asking the universe why. And in that silence, he realized something terrifying, unfreeing. If the world wouldn't help him, if luck had abandoned him, he would have to become his own salvation. Every hero he had read about in the library had faced this truth. Now, so did he. Evan looked up at the city skyline that night, a glittering crown that seemed unreachable. The bridges, the towers, the lights, they were monuments to people who had fought, clawed, and refused to stop. And in the reflection of those lights on puddles and broken glass, Evan made a vow. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. He would start building. Not with money, not with connections, not with luck, but with persistence, vision, and the kind of stubborn courage that refused to die on a concrete slab. The streets could try to break him. The world could try to ignore him. But Evan Cole had tasted nothingness. And now he hungered for everything.
The morning sunlight had a new quality now, sharper, more focused, almost judgmental. Evan Cole walked down the cracked pavement, noticing details he hadn't before: a flyer flapping in the wind, a businessman rushing past, the glint of coins in a fountain that no one bothered to retrieve. The city had not changed. It was still indifferent. But Evan had changed. He carried a quiet confidence now, one built not from wealth, not from influence, but from survival. He had a plan forming in his mind, fragile and trembling like a newborn bird. The first step. He needed work that didn't just pay the bills, but taught him skills he could eventually turn into something bigger. One evening, while delivering groceries for a small neighborhood store, Evan noticed a man struggling with boxes outside a warehouse. Without thinking, he ran over and offered help. The man, Mr. Grayson, was surprised by the boy's initiative, and he agreed to let Evan assist him. That evening, Evan carried more than boxes. He carried the weight of possibility. Each crate was a lesson: efficiency, responsibility, endurance. Mr. Grayson started noticing that Evan didn't just work, he observed, adapted, remembered. "Most people just show up to be seen," he said once. "You're different, kid." Those words, simple as they were, hit harder than any lecture, any lesson he'd read in a book. Weeks passed, and Evan's diligence began to bear fruit. Mr. Grayson trusted him with small administrative tasks, keeping ledgers, helping plan deliveries, negotiating minor deals. Evan made mistakes, yes. But he learned faster than anyone expected. He stayed late, watched videos on negotiation, sales, and business strategy. He memorized numbers, patterns, trends. For the first time, the faint glow of hope became something tangible, a bridge between survival and success. He realized opportunity was never free. It had to be earned, and he was ready to earn it.
The money was still meager, but it was enough to rent a tiny room above a laundromat. No bridge, no concrete, no freezing nights. Evan had earned a foothold in a city that had once ignored him. That room, barely furnished and smelling faintly of detergent, felt like a palace. He slept on a thin mattress, ate simple meals, and spent his evenings writing plans. He scribbled ideas for businesses, savings strategies, and ways to leverage his growing knowledge. Each note, each scribble, was a seed, and he was determined to grow a forest from it. Evan's first real success came unexpectedly. A local cafe wanted to expand its delivery service but had no one to manage it. Evan volunteered. He tracked deliveries, optimized routes, and even convinced a few regular customers to pre-order. Within weeks, the cafe's owner noticed profits improving. Evan's name started circulating quietly in the neighborhood. "The boy who fixes problems," they whispered. He wasn't rich, not yet. But he was no longer invisible. Every small victory gave him something he hadn't felt in years: control. And with control came a dangerous, intoxicating sense of possibility, but success always attracts challenges. A competitor noticed Evan's methods and tried to undercut the cafe. Orders were lost, customers confused, and Evan's systems tested. For the first time, he felt the sting of real pressure. He could have panicked, retreated, disappeared back to the streets. Instead, he analyzed, adapted, and improved. Within a month, the cafe not only recovered but was thriving. Evan understood a truth that would guide him forever: adversity doesn't break you, it reveals how strong you are. Late one night, Evan stood outside the cafe, watching the city lights flicker. He remembered the bridges, the alleys, the nights of hunger and despair. And he smiled. Not because life had become easy, it hadn't, but because he realized he had finally stepped onto a path. A path where every small victory mattered, where persistence outweighed luck, and where a boy who had been nothing could one day become someone unforgettable. He didn't yet know the empire he would build, but he felt it. Deep in his bones, in the rhythm of his heartbeat. The city had ignored him once. Never again. The city never slept, and neither did Evan Cole, not really. Every morning, he woke before the sun. Every night, he stayed up past it, studying, planning, observing. The small victories had given him confidence, but he knew they were just the first rungs of a ladder that stretched far above him. One day, a client from the cafe recommended Evan to a small logistics startup. They were desperate for someone to organize deliveries efficiently and manage a growing team. Evan took the offer without hesitation. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't secure. But it was opportunity, and Evan had learned that opportunity had to be seized before it vanished. At the startup, Evan encountered his first real test. The team he managed was skeptical of a young boy who had literally come from the streets. They doubted him, undermined him, and mocked his lack of formal education. Evan could have retreated. Most people would have. But he didn't. Instead, he observed, listened, and acted. He quickly realized that leadership wasn't about titles or degrees, it was about respect earned through action. By showing competence, patience, and consistency, he gradually won over the team. He had learned something crucial: if you could command respect without fear, you could survive anything.
The startup was growing fast, and with growth came money, but also competition. A rival company saw the efficiency Evan brought and tried to poach his clients, offering lower prices and flashy promises. Most people would have panicked. Evan did the opposite. He studied the rival, learned their weaknesses, and improved his own systems. He implemented new delivery tracking methods, offered better incentives to loyal customers, and strengthened his relationships with the staff. Within months, not only had he protected his clients, but he had expanded the business beyond what anyone expected. Evan realized something powerful: survival wasn't enough anymore, he could dominate. As the months turned into a year, Evan began to see the first fruits of his labor. The startup's profits soared. He received recognition, small bonuses, and the respect of industry insiders. But for Evan, the real victory was internal. He had transformed from a scared, hungry boy into a man who could command rooms, solve complex problems, and make decisions that affected dozens of lives. The streets had taught him grit, the cafe had taught him initiative, and now the startup was teaching him strategy. Piece by piece, he was building the foundation of something larger than himself, but life has a way of testing resolve at the peak of growth. One evening, Evan received devastating news: Mr. Grayson, the man who had first given him a chance, had fallen ill. The cafe was struggling without his guidance. The startup was demanding all of Evan's attention. He felt torn. For the first time since his life began to turn, Evan faced a moral crossroads. Would he chase wealth and opportunity, or would he honor loyalty and repay those who had believed in him when no one else would? Evan didn't hesitate. He divided his time, bringing in temporary managers for the cafe and dedicating nights to the startup. He realized success wasn't just about personal gain, it was about lifting others along the way. His relentless work ethic began to pay off in ways he hadn't anticipated. Investors noticed his efficiency, competitors respected his ingenuity, and colleagues admired his leadership. Invitations to speak at small business events arrived. People began asking how a boy from the streets could rise so quickly. Evan didn't answer with arrogance or boastfulness. He answered with action. He kept building, kept learning, kept moving forward. Every setback had become a lesson, every insult a motivator. The boy who once slept under a bridge had grown into a man who could command attention in boardrooms, late at night, standing on the rooftop of the building where the startup was headquartered. Evan looked out over the city that had once ignored him. Lights glittered like scattered coins, streets hummed with life, and the bridges he had once slept under looked smaller from up here. He smiled, not because the climb was over, far from it, but because he now knew the rules of the game. The world could challenge him, competitors could try to break him, and life could throw him into despair again. But Evan Cole had learned how to fight, survive, and rise. And this was only the beginning. Evan Cole was no longer just surviving, he was strategizing. The lessons of the streets had fused with the lessons of the boardroom, creating a mind that could spot opportunity where others saw chaos. He began investing the small savings he had accumulated into side projects, delivery apps, small logistics contracts, and eventually, rental properties. Each move was calculated, each decision deliberate. While others chased instant gratification, Evan chased compounding growth, understanding that wealth wasn't just about money, but leverage, vision, and timing. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A tech startup wanted to partner with a logistics company to optimize citywide deliveries. Evan saw the potential immediately and offered a plan that no one else could match, a combination of street-smart intuition and data-driven strategy. The partnership went through, and overnight, his operations expanded beyond the neighborhood into the city proper. Drivers he had once trained in a dusty alley now managed fleets, software tracked deliveries, and Evan had begun building something far larger than himself. For the first time, he tasted true power, not the kind measured in cash, but the kind measured in influence and reach. Yet, with growth came enemies. Competitors tried to sabotage him, spreading false rumors about his reliability. Suppliers demanded higher prices, claiming he was too small to negotiate. Investors questioned his youth and his unconventional methods. Most people would have crumbled under the weight of doubt and opposition. But Evan thrived on it. Every challenge became a chess piece. Every obstacle, a strategy test. Slowly, methodically, he outmaneuvered them. By the time anyone realized, Evan wasn't just surviving in the city, he was shaping it. Success didn't erase his past, it amplified it. Memories of cold nights under bridges, of hunger and shame, fueled his relentless drive. Evan ensured he never forgot the boy he had been. He built a foundation for at-risk youth, offering mentorship and small business grants to kids who had nowhere to turn. He invested in local infrastructure and partnered with community leaders. Every brick he laid in the city was both literal and symbolic, a tribute to his struggle, a defiance of the system that had tried to bury him. By now, media outlets began to take notice. From homeless to mobile, headlines ran in local papers. People were fascinated, inspired, and incredulous. Evan didn't seek fame, but he understood the power of story. He used it to open doors for new ventures, for partnerships that once seemed impossible. The boy who had begged for coins now negotiated multi-million contracts. And while the world marveled, Evan kept his eyes on the horizon. One empire was enough to prove survival, now he was building a legacy. Personal life, however, was not without sacrifice. Long nights, relentless focus, and constant pressure left Evan drained. Relationships were difficult, trust was cautious, and the fear of failure never fully disappeared. But he had learned to convert that fear into fuel. Every sleepless night became an opportunity to plan, innovate, and secure the next step. He was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was the architect of his destiny. And for a boy who had once whispered under a bridge, that was the sweetest victory of all. The city lights glimmered once more, this time not as reminders of despair, but as symbols of conquest. Evan Cole stood atop his first high-rise building, overlooking the streets he had once roamed homeless. The wind carried a sense of infinite possibility. He had survived hunger, abandonment, betrayal, and doubt. And now, with each calculated move, he was unstoppable. Evan Cole had reached a point few could imagine. From the streets to boardrooms, from bridges to high-rises, he had become a force in a city that had once ignored him. But he knew true victory wasn't measured in wealth alone. It was measured in the lives you touched, the systems you changed, and the proof that someone who had nothing could achieve everything. Each deal, each expansion, each victory was not just for him, it was a statement to the world. Hope is stronger than despair. The final push came when Evan was offered a partnership to acquire a major logistics firm, a company that controlled the city's largest delivery networks. Many advised caution, warning that he was still young, inexperienced, and overreaching. Evan listened, nodded, but refused to be intimidated. He had spent years learning the rules of survival, the nuances of business, and the weight of responsibility. This was no longer chance. This was destiny. Negotiations were brutal. Boardroom tables became battlefields. Lawyers, investors, and competitors all tried to intimidate him. But Evan's life had been a school in resilience. He approached every challenge with clarity, patience, and strategy. Where others saw risk, he saw leverage. Where others saw obstacles, he saw openings. Slowly, methodically, he built trust, countered every attack, and positioned himself to win. And when the final contract was signed, it wasn't just a business victory, it was the symbolic culmination of a lifetime spent defying odds. But Evan didn't stop there. He remembered the boy who had no one, the nights spent hungry under a bridge, the streets that had shaped him. He created programs for youth, scholarships, and mentorship networks. He invested in neighborhoods, helping communities that mirrored his own past. The empire he built wasn't just for profit, it was a bridge for the next generation. He understood a truth most billionaires never learn: power is most meaningful when it lifts others. News outlets called him a phenomenon, social media labeled him a legend, and the city began to view him as an icon. Yet Evan remained grounded, never forgetting the lessons of hunger, loss, and abandonment. In interviews, he spoke not of luck or privilege, but of persistence, courage, and the relentless refusal to surrender. And every time someone doubted him, he smiled quietly, remembering the cold concrete under the bridge, the nights of emptiness, the whisper of a boy promising himself he wouldn't die there. Standing on the rooftop of his latest skyscraper, overlooking the city that had once been indifferent to his existence, Evan felt something profound: peace. Not the peace of comfort. Not the peace of ease, but the peace of triumph. Every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had led here. He could see the streets below, the alleys where he had wandered, the cafes where he had worked, and the library where he had learned to dream. And he understood that life had given him a gift far greater than wealth, the proof that a human being can rise, against every odds, from nothing to everything. Evan turned away from the lights, eyes shining with purpose. The city was his, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of mastery, of influence, and of legacy. He had gone from a boy invisible to a man unforgettable. And in that moment, he realized the ultimate truth: beginnings do not define endings. Hardships forge strength and hope. Hope can build empires. From sleeping under a bridge to owning the city, Evan Cole had rewritten his story, and in doing so, inspired every soul who dared to dream when the world had abandoned them.